I found my overnight bag packed and sitting by the front door when I came back from my afternoon walk. My heart stopped cold. Inside were my medications, neatly organized in a pill organizer, 3 sets of clothes folded with military precision, and my favorite framed photo of my late husband, James. What's happening? I asked my son Michael, who couldn't look me in the eye. That's when Rebecca, my daughter-in-law, stepped forward with that smile, that terrible, patient smile she uses when she thinks I'm being difficult. We've been talking about this for weeks, Margaret, she said, though we absolutely had not. The car will be here in 20 minutes to take you to Sunny Pines. I'd never even heard of Sunny Pines before that moment. I'm not going anywhere, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. Rebecca's smile didn't waver as she placed her hand on my shoulder, a touch that felt like a shackle. We've already signed all the paperwork, she said, sliding a glossy brochure into my trembling hands. It's a beautiful facility with full-time care. Your Medicare and supplemental insurance cover most of it. My son still wouldn't meet my eyes. Then Rebecca leaned in close. Her perfume was too sweet, like rotting flowers suffocating me as she whispered, "And if you make a scene, we can have you admitted involuntarily. Dr. Harris has already signed the recommendation." I remembered Dr. Harris. I'd seen him once, for 10 minutes, 3 months ago when Rebecca insisted I needed a cognitive evaluation. I never got to see the results. As Rebecca turned to answer a text message, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The photo she'd packed wasn't of James at all, it was of her own father. She didn't even know which photo mattered most to me. 37 years of marriage, and she couldn't be bothered to pack the right picture. That's when I knew this wasn't about my well-being at all. In that moment, while Rebecca was distracted and Michael was hiding in the kitchen, I did the only thing I could think of. I called the one person who had always seen through Rebecca's manipulations from day one, her own mother, Eleanor. "Eleanor," I whispered into the phone, my voice breaking, "they're trying to put me away. Right now. Please help me." What happened next changed everything. I never thought I'd find myself in this position. 5 years ago, I was living in the same 3-bedroom colonial where I'd raised my children and spent most of my adult life. James and I had purchased it in 1978 for $42,500, a fortune back then. Over the decades it had become more than a house. It was the keeper of our memories, the height marks on the kitchen door frame, the dent in the living room wall from when Michael tried to practice baseball indoors, the garden James had lovingly tended until his last days. After James passed away from a sudden heart attack at 68, I stayed in our home, determined to maintain my independence despite my children's concerns. Michael, my only son, visited weekly at first. He'd bring groceries, check that the house was in order, and sit with me for Sunday dinners where we'd reminisce about James. "Dad would have loved to see how the maple tree has grown," he'd say, looking out at the backyard. "Remember how tiny it was when we planted it?" Those early days of grief held a special kind of closeness between us. Michael had always been sensitive, more like his father than like me, and I could see James in the gentle way he'd make sure I had everything I needed before leaving. "Are you sure you'll be okay, Mom?" he'd always ask at the door. "I'm just a phone call away," and I believed him. Then Michael met Rebecca at a work conference in Phoenix. She was 10 years his junior, ambitious, and I noticed immediately used to getting her way. "She's so organized, Mom," Michael gushed during their first visit to my home. "She's already helping me set up a retirement account and looking into investment properties." I nodded and smiled, happy that my son had found someone, trying to ignore the way Rebecca surveyed my home with critical eyes, running her finger along shelves to check for dust. "This is such a charming old place," she said, emphasis on old in a way that made me bristle. Still, I made an effort. I prepared her favorite foods after Michael mentioned she preferred kale salads and gluten-free options, though she barely touched the meal I'd spent hours preparing. The wedding was small. Rebecca's preference just immediate family and a few close friends at a vineyard in Sonoma that cost Michael $22,000 for a 4-hour event. I wore a blue dress I'd bought specially and brought a piece of lace from my own wedding gown as a gift, something old I offered to Rebecca in the bridal suite. She took it between 2 fingers like it might disintegrate, tucked it into a drawer, and said, "That's sweet, Margaret, but we've actually got a modern theme going." I never saw the lace again. During the reception, I overheard Rebecca telling her friend, Michael's mom is adjusting well, considering we visit the old homestead every month or so to check on her. Make sure she's not burning the place down. I was 65 years old and in perfect health, but in Rebecca's narrative, I was already decrepit. After the honeymoon, the visits became less frequent, more structured. Rebecca would come with Michael, clipboard in hand, inspecting my refrigerator and medicine. Kavanaugh just helping you stay organized, she'd say when I objected. Then came the suggestions, each one framed as concern. Margaret, wouldn't it be easier if you downsized? Or have you considered one of those lovely senior communities? Each time, Michael would remain silent, a spectator to the subtle power struggle between his wife and mother. I stood my ground, showing them my calendar full of book club meetings, volunteer shifts at the library, and coffee dates with friends. I'm more active now than when I was working full-time, I laughed, but Rebecca just smiled, that patient smile. Everyone slows down eventually, she replied. The real change came after I fell. It wasn't serious. I tripped over an extension cord and bruised my hip. My neighbor Martha helped me up and stayed with me until the pain subsided. I didn't even tell Michael about it, but somehow Rebecca found out. 3 days later, they were at my door with a solution. We've found a wonderful condo in our neighborhood, Rebecca announced, spreading brochures across my kitchen table. Single level, no stairs, and just 10 minutes from us. We can check on you every day. The brochures showed a sterile-looking building with the word senior prominently displayed. I felt my independence slipping away with each glossy page they turned. I'm not leaving my home, I said firmly. Michael looked pained, but Rebecca's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. We'll talk about this again when you're feeling more reasonable, she said, gathering the brochures. As they left, I heard her murmur to Michael, this is exactly why we need to move quickly. She's becoming obstinate. After that visit, things started disappearing from my home. First, it was small items, my step stool, the rug in the hallway, the extension cords, trip hazards, Rebecca explained when I asked. Then bigger changes, my car keys would mysteriously vanish before their visits, only to reappear after they left. Did you forget where you put them again? Rebecca would ask with exaggerated concern, exchanging meaningful glances with Michael. One afternoon, I returned from grocery shopping to find a locksmith changing my front door lock. Michael asked me to upgrade your security, the man explained, handing me a single new key. What he didn't tell me was that Michael and Rebecca now had copies of their own. I discovered this only when I woke one morning to find Rebecca in my kitchen, organizing my medication. You're not taking these properly, she insisted, though I'd managed my blood pressure medication without incident for years. The most disturbing incident happened on my birthday. Michael and Rebecca had promised to take me to dinner at my favorite Italian restaurant, the same place James used to bring me for anniversaries. I spent the day getting ready, even splurging on having my hair done. At 5:30, I was dressed and waiting. By 6:15, I called Michael's cell phone. Oh, Mom, he sounded genuinely confused. We thought that was next weekend. We're at a work dinner for Rebecca right now in the city. In the background, I could hear Rebecca's voice, sharp and impatient. Tell her, we'll reschedule. Later that evening, I checked my calendar where I'd written the date in red ink, and below it, in my own handwriting, birthday dinner with Michael and Rebecca, 6 p.m. I took a photo of it with the phone my granddaughter had taught me to use. I was beginning to understand that I needed evidence. I started keeping track after that. A small notebook, hidden in my knitting basket where Rebecca never looked, became my record of inconsistencies. March 15th, Rebecca claimed I'd agreed to a doctor's appointment I never made. March 23rd, Michael said they'd called twice last week, but my phone showed no missed calls. April 2nd, found my address book missing after their visit, with all my friends' contact information. April 10th, Rebecca reorganized my kitchen, moving items to high shelves I couldn't reach without a ladder. It was a pattern, subtle but persistent. They were isolating me, making me dependent, creating a paper trail of my supposed decline. But for what purpose? I couldn't understand why Rebecca would go to such lengths until I overheard her on the phone one afternoon while Michael was helping me in the garden. The house has to be worth at least $450,000 in this market, Rebecca was saying to someone. Once we get her into assisted living, Michael will inherit everything. As the only child, we can sell the house, use a small portion for her care, and finally have enough for the lake house we've been eyeing. I froze, trowel in hand, dirt under my fingernails. So that was it. My home, the home where James and I had built our life, where we'd raised our son, was just real estate to her, and I was just an obstacle. I waited until Michael drove me home, maintaining a calm facade while my mind raced. That night, I called my old friend Diane, who'd retired from legal practice the year before. Document everything, she advised. And whatever you do, don't sign anything they give you. The next time Rebecca brought paperwork, just some healthcare proxies we should update. I told her I'd have my friend who's a retired attorney review them first. The flash of alarm on her face confirmed my suspicions. That's really not necessary, she said quickly. These are standard forms. When I insisted, she gathered the papers and left, claiming they weren't finalized anyway. 2 days later, my landline stopped working. The phone company said someone had called to discontinue service. Someone who knew my social security number and account password. My cell phone, thankfully, was on my granddaughter's family plan, something Rebecca didn't know about. I called Diane again, this time from the safety of the library's public phone. They're escalating, I told her. I'm afraid of what comes next. Diane suggested I visit her in person, away from my house, where Rebecca and Michael might show up unannounced. I took the bus to her condominium, bringing my notebook of documented incidents. As we sat in her sunlit living room, I showed her everything. The canceled appointments I never made, the rescheduled doctor visits with specialists I'd never heard of, the cognitive assessment Rebecca had scheduled without telling me until the day before. They're building a case, Diane said, her expression grave. They want control of your assets. Have you checked your bank accounts lately? I hadn't. James had always handled our finances, and after his death, I'd muddled through, paying bills on time but not paying much attention to statements or balances. When Diane helped me log into my online banking that afternoon, what we found made my stomach drop. There had been withdrawals small enough not to trigger immediate concern, but regular, $200 here, $350 there, always from ATMs near Michael and Rebecca's house. Over 6 months, nearly $7,000 had disappeared. I'll never forget how I felt walking back to the bus stop from Diane's place that day. For the first time since James died, I felt truly alone. The son I raised, the boy who once brought me dandelions and called them flowers, was allowing his wife to systematically dismantle my life. Or, worse, participating in it. The next morning, I called my bank and changed all my passwords and PINs. I asked them to flag my account for suspicious activity and required in-person ID for any withdrawals. The banker, a kind woman named Teresa, looked at me with understanding eyes when I explained my concerns. Unfortunately, we see this kind of thing often, she said quietly. Elder financial abuse is common, even from family members. Would you like information about adding an extra layer of protection to your accounts? I nodded, fighting back tears. And please, I added, don't discuss this with anyone who calls asking about my accounts, even if they say they're my son. After securing my finances, I reached out to other allies. I told Martha next door what was happening, and she promised to check on me daily and call the police if she saw anything concerning. I reconnected with my old church group, making sure people would notice if I suddenly disappeared from activities. I even spoke with my mail carrier Ron, explaining that any changes to my mail delivery should only come from me, in person. But my most unexpected ally came in the form of Eleanor, Rebecca's mother. We'd met at the wedding and a few family events since, exchanging pleasant but superficial conversation. I'd always sensed a certain stiffness between her and her daughter, but I never knew why. On impulse, I called her, inviting her for coffee when I knew Rebecca and Michael would be at work. I'd love to, she said, sounding genuinely pleased. Rebecca keeps me so busy with the grandchildren, I hardly have time for adult conversation anymore. Eleanor arrived at my house exactly on time, a tall woman with Rebecca's features, but softer, without the sharp edges. She complimented my garden, accepted tea, and for a while, we chatted about neutral topics. the unusually warm spring, a book we'd both read, her grandchildren, my son's stepchildren, whom she adored. Then, carefully, I steered the conversation toward Rebecca. You've raised a very organized daughter, I began diplomatically. Eleanor's laugh held a note of bitterness. Oh yes, Rebecca has always been methodical about getting what she wants. She stirred her tea, hesitating before continuing. She was the same with her father's estate. Very efficient. Something in her tone made me pay close attention. I don't mean to pry, I said, but did something happen? Eleanor set down her cup and looked directly at me. Margaret, has Rebecca been suggesting you might be better off somewhere other than your home? That question, so specific, so relevant to my situation, opened the floodgates. I told Eleanor everything, from the missing keys to the bank withdrawals, the cancelled phone service, the cognitive assessments with doctors I'd met only once. As I spoke, Eleanor's expression shifted from concern to recognition to something like grim vindication. When I finished, she reached across the table and took my hands in hers. 5 years ago, Rebecca did the same thing to her father and me, she said quietly. Vernon had early Parkinson's, but he was still fully capable. She convinced us both that a specialized care facility would be best for him. What she didn't tell us was that she'd already arranged to sell our house. The temporary facility became permanent. Vernon died there 6 months later, alone, while Rebecca was handling the sale of our home. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I now live in a small apartment Rebecca selected, on a monthly allowance from what should have been my own money. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But how? Eleanor wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. Rebecca was Vernon's power of attorney. He signed the papers thinking they were just precautionary, but she used them immediately, claiming he was no longer competent. By the time I realized what was happening, everything was in her control. Vernon's business, our savings, the house all gone. She looked around my living room with new understanding. Your home is beautiful and valuable, I imagine. In this neighborhood, the pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Rebecca had done this before. This wasn't opportunism. It was a calculated strategy she'd perfected with her own parents. Eleanor, I said, my mind racing with implications, would you be willing to help me if things escalate? Would you testify to what she did to you and Vernon? Eleanor's posture straightened, a flash of the strong woman she must have been before Rebecca diminished her. I've been waiting years for a chance to stop her from doing this to someone else, she said. I have copies of everything, the facility contracts, the house sale, the power of attorney documents, all with dates that prove the timeline of her deception. I kept them, thinking someday I might. She trailed off, then squared her shoulders. Yes, Margaret, I'll help you. Before she left that day, we exchanged cell phone numbers and agreed to check in daily. Call me anytime, she insisted, day or night. I mean it. As I watched her drive away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Eleanor understood exactly what Rebecca was capable of, because she'd lived through it herself. And now, she was my secret weapon. With Eleanor's confirmation of Rebecca's pattern, I developed a more comprehensive defense strategy. Diane helped me draft a new will and advance directives, explicitly stating my wishes to remain in my home as long as medically possible, and naming my niece, not Michaelis, my healthcare proxy. I had the documents notarized and filed copies with my new attorney, a specialist in elder law whom Diane recommended. I installed a small safe in my bedroom closet for important papers, using a combination no one could guess. The date of my first date with James, a memory no one could fabricate or find on any document. I even set up hidden cameras in my living room and kitchen, small devices that looked like ordinary clock radios but would activate with motion, saving footage to a secure cloud account my granddaughter helped me create. The cameras proved their worth almost immediately. 2 days after installing them, while I was at my weekly bridge game, my motion alerts showed Rebecca entering my home with a man in a suit. They went through my desk, my file cabinet, even my bedroom drawers. The man took photos of my medication bottles and made notes on a clipboard. When I returned home, nothing seemed disturbed. They'd been careful, but I had video evidence of their unauthorized search. The man, I later learned from His business card left accidentally in my kitchen was a private nurse evaluator who assessed potential clients for home care services. Rebecca had brought him to build a case for my need for supervision. I downloaded the footage and added it to my growing file of evidence, then called Eleanor. "It's happening faster than we expected," I told her. "They were in my house today." Eleanor suggested I confront them directly about the unauthorized visit, to let them know I was aware of their actions without revealing how I knew. The next day, I called Michael and asked him and Rebecca to come over for dinner, promising to cook Michael's favorite meatloaf. When they arrived, I waited until we were seated at the table before casually asking, "So, what did the nurse evaluator think of my home?" Michael's fork clattered against his plate. Rebecca's smile froze. "What are you talking about, Mom?" Michael asked, genuinely confused. Rebecca recovered quickly. "I think she's confused again, honey. Remember how she thought someone was in the house last month too?" I kept my eyes on Rebecca as I reached for my phone and pulled up a photo I'd taken from the video footage, clear image of her standing in my living room with the evaluator. "I'm not confused, Rebecca. I know you were here yesterday at 2:15 p.m. What I don't know is why you felt the need to bring a stranger into my home without my permission." The color drained from Rebecca's face, but her recovery was impressive. "Michael, your mother has obviously set up some kind of surveillance system in her home. That's paranoid behavior. Exactly what Dr. Harris warned us about." She turned to me, voice gentle but condescending. "Margaret, we're concerned about you. These delusions, the paranoia, it's why we've been considering additional support options." Michael looked bewildered, caught between his wife's confident assertions and the evidence in my hand. "There's a simple way to resolve this," I said calmly. "Let's call the evaluator Tim Gregory from Sunshine Home Health. According to the card he left, ask him who authorized yesterday's visit." Rebecca's hand closed over Michael's wrist. "We don't need to bother Mr. Gregory." "Yes. I asked him to assess the house for potential modifications that might help your mother stay home longer. I was trying to help to find alternatives to the facility options. I should have mentioned it, but it was meant to be a helpful surprise." The lie was smooth, but Michael wasn't fully convinced. "Why didn't you tell me about this, Beck?" he asked. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. Rebecca laughed lightly. "It was just preliminary, honey. I was going to discuss options with you once I had more information. Your mother is making it sound suspicious, but I was actually trying to find ways to support her independence." She turned to me with practiced concern. "Margaret, I wish you'd trust that we have your best interests at heart. All these secrets and cameras, it's not healthy." I maintained my composure, though inside I was shaking. "Trust is earned, Rebecca. And it's difficult to trust someone who enters my home without permission, regardless of the reason." The rest of the dinner was tense, with Rebecca steering the conversation to lighter topics while occasionally exchanging meaningful glances with Michael. As they were leaving, Rebecca hugged me, something she rarely did. "We'll figure this out together," she whispered, her voice sweet but her grip uncomfortably tight. "Family takes care of family." The threat beneath her words was unmistakable. The next morning, I received a call from my doctor's office. "Mrs. Wilson, Dr. Patel asked me to call. We've received a request for your complete medical records from Sunny Pines Assisted Living. They've submitted paperwork indicating you'll be a resident there starting next month. Do you want us to process this request?" My blood ran cold. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "I have not agreed to move to any facility. Please note in my file that any such requests should be verified with me personally before any information is released." The receptionist hesitated. "The request form has your signature on it, Mrs. Wilson." My hand tightened around the phone. "That signature is fraudulent. I want to speak with Dr. Patel immediately, and I want to see a copy of this form." An hour later, I was in Dr. Patel's office, looking at a form with a reasonable facsimile of my signature, close enough to pass a casual inspection, but definitely not my handwriting. Dr. Patel, who had been my physician for over a decade, studied my face as I examined the document. "I take patient autonomy very seriously," he said. "Can you tell me what's happening?" I told Dr. Patel everything: Rebecca's escalating behavior, the financial irregularities, Eleanor's story about her husband as a mandated reporter for elder abuse. He took detailed notes and asked pointed questions about my daily functioning. Then he performed a thorough cognitive assessment, documenting that I showed no signs of impairment that would warrant institutional care. "I'm adding comprehensive notes to your file," he assured me. "If anyone requests evaluations or tries to claim you lack capacity, they'll need to go through me first. And Margaret," he added, his expression serious, "consider filing a police report about the forged signature. That's fraud." I thanked him, relieved to have another ally, and asked for copies of my complete medical records to store in my safe. As I was leaving, Dr. Patel called after me. "I've known you for 12 years. You're sharp as ever. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Armed with Dr. Patel's assessment and the fraudulent form, I consulted with my new attorney, Sandra Mendez. "This is attempted medical fraud," she said bluntly, examining the form. "Combined with the financial withdrawals and unauthorized home entry, we have enough to file for a protective order, if needed." She helped me draft a formal cease and desist letter to Rebecca and Michael, specifying that any attempts to relocate me, access my finances, or make medical decisions on my behalf without my explicit consent would result in legal action. "This puts them on notice," Sandra explained. "It establishes that you're aware of their actions and prepared to defend yourself legally." She recommended I deliver the letter in person, with a witness present. "Don't send it by mail, they might intercept it. And don't confront Rebecca alone. Your friend Eleanor would be an ideal witness." Given her history with Rebecca, Eleanor readily agreed to accompany me to Michael and Rebecca's house the following Saturday morning. "Rebecca sleeps late on weekends," she confided. "Michael will likely answer the door." She was right. Michael, in sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, looked startled to find his mother and mother-in-law on his doorstep at 8:30 a.m. "Mom, Eleanor, is everything okay?" Behind him, their immaculate living room, Rebecca's domain looked sterile and unlived in, like a furniture showroom. "We need to speak with you and Rebecca," I said firmly. "It's important." Michael hesitated, then stepped back to let us in. "Beck's still sleeping. Let me go wake her." While he was gone, Eleanor squeezed my hand reassuringly. We could hear muffled voices upstairs, Michael's gentle urging, Rebecca's sharper response. 10 minutes later, Rebecca appeared, hair perfectly arranged, despite the early hour, wearing loungewear that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. What a surprise! To what do we owe this unconventional visit? I placed the cease and desist letter on their glass coffee table. "This is a formal notice that I'm aware of the attempts to control my finances, falsify my medical documents, and force me into a care facility against my will." Rebecca's smile vanished. Michael looked stunned. "What are you talking about?" he asked. I kept my voice steady as I outlined everything: the bank withdrawals, the forged signature on the Sunny Pines forms, the unauthorized home evaluation. With each revelation, Michael's expression shifted from confusion to horror. Rebecca's face remained impassive, but a muscle twitched in her jaw. When I finished, she turned to Eleanor. "And you're involved in this delusion. I expected better from you, Mother." Eleanor met her daughter's gaze without flinching. "It's not a delusion, Rebecca. It's a pattern. You did the same to your father and me." Rebecca laughed, a brittle sound. "Dad had Parkinson's. He needed specialized care. We discussed it as a family." Eleanor's voice was quiet but firm. "Vernon was diagnosed with early Parkinson's, yes, but he was still managing his own company when you put him in that facility. The doctors projected he had years of independence ahead of him. You accelerated everything: the care facility, selling our home." While he could still function normally, Michael was looking between his wife and her mother, confusion evident. "Beck, what is she talking about?" Rebecca stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. They're conspiring against me because they're jealous of what we've built. Your mother has never approved of me, and mine has always resented my success." She turned to me, eyes cold. "Margaret, your cognitive decline is obvious to everyone but you. These paranoid accusations, secret meetings, filming your own house, these aren't the actions of a stable person. We've been trying to help you transition gracefully, but clearly that's not possible." She picked up the letter without opening it. "We'll have our attorney review this. Now, I think you both should leave." As Eleanor and I walked to my car, I could see Michael watching us from the window, his expression troubled. "He's wavering. Eleanor said quietly. Rebecca's narrative is falling apart. I wasn't so sure. Michael had always sought peace, avoiding conflict whenever possible. It was easier for him to believe his wife than to accept that she'd been systematically undermining his mother. What happens now? I asked Eleanor as I started the car. She fastened her seatbelt with determination. Now we wait for their next move. And Margaret, she added, her voice grim, based on my experience with Rebecca, it will be decisive, and it will be soon. Stay vigilant. She was right, more right than either of us could have imagined. The confrontation had forced Rebecca's hand, and she wasn't going to waste time on subtle manipulations anymore. 3 days passed without any contact from Michael or Rebecca. I maintained my normal routine, attending my book club, volunteering at the library, checking in daily with Eleanor. On the 4th day, I received a certified letter from a law firm representing Michael and Rebecca. It stated that they had grave concerns about my cognitive health and independent living situation, citing paranoid behavior, installation of unnecessary surveillance equipment, and unfounded accusations against family members attempting to provide care. The letter informed me that they were petitioning for an emergency guardianship hearing scheduled for the following week, where they would present evidence from multiple healthcare professionals supporting their claim that I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. The final paragraph delivered the most chilling news. If the petition was granted, Michael would be appointed my guardian with full control over my living arrangements, healthcare decisions, and financial assets. I called Sandra Mendez immediately. This is exactly what they did to Eleanor and her husband, I told her, my voice shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. They're trying to fast-track this before I can mount a proper defense. Sandra's response was immediate and reassuring. We anticipated this possibility. I'll file our counter-petition today, including Dr. Patel's recent assessment and affidavits from your friends attesting to your continued competence. I'll also request that the judge assign an independent evaluator rather than relying on doctors selected by your son and daughter-in-law. She paused, then added, Margaret, where are you right now? I told her I was at home. Is there someone who can stay with you for the next few days? I'm concerned they might try to have you evaluated or even removed from your home before the hearing. The fear I'd been suppressing surged to the surface. They wouldn't, I began, but even as I spoke, I knew they would. Rebecca had done it before. Eleanor arrived at my house an hour later with a small suitcase. I'm staying until the hearing, she announced, brushing aside my protests. Rebecca won't expect me to be here. It changes her calculations. That evening, as Eleanor prepared dinner in my kitchen, moving comfortably through a space Rebecca had always criticized as outdated, I felt a strange sense of peace despite the looming threat. Why are you helping me? I asked suddenly. This could damage your relationship with Rebecca permanently. Eleanor stirred the soup she was making, her back to me. Margaret, that relationship was damaged beyond repair the day I realized what she'd done to Vernon. I've been playing along, being the compliant mother, to maintain access to my grandchildren. But I can't stand by and watch her destroy another family. She turned to face me, wooden spoon still in hand. Besides, I like you. You remind me of who I used to be before Rebecca convinced me I couldn't manage on my own. For the next 3 days, Eleanor and I prepared for the hearing. Sandra came to the house with documents for me to sign and strategies to discuss. Martha from next door brought over casseroles and concerned hugs. My book club members each wrote letters attesting to my mental acuity and independence, which Sandra would submit to the court. Through it all, I kept expecting Michael to call, to check on me, to give some indication that he was conflicted about what was happening. But my phone remained silent, at least from him. The only contact came in the form of a text message from Rebecca. We're doing this for your own good. Don't make it harder than it needs to be. I showed the message to Sandra, who added it to our growing file of evidence. Classic manipulation, she noted, making her actions sound benevolent while subtly threatening you if you resist. As the hearing date approached, my anxiety increased. What if the judge believed Rebecca's carefully constructed narrative? What if my own son testified that I was incompetent? The thought of losing my home, my independence, my dignity, it was almost unbearable. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in James's old armchair by the window, looking out at the street where we'd watched our son learn to ride a bike, where we'd waved goodbye as he left for college, where James had taught him to change a tire on his first car. How had we come to this? Where had I gone wrong as a mother that Michael could participate in this campaign against me? Around 3 a.m., I heard Eleanor come downstairs. Without a word, she made us both tea and sat in the chair opposite mine. The night before Vernon's guardianship hearing, I couldn't sleep either, she said after a while. I kept thinking about all the signs I'd missed, all the times I could have spoken up but didn't. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was partly my fault, that if I'd been more assertive, more aware, Vernon wouldn't be in that facility. She looked at me, her eyes bright in the dim light. It wasn't my fault, Margaret, and this isn't yours. Some people, even our own children, make choices we can never understand. We sat together until dawn, two mothers united by the same pain, watching the sky lighten with the promise of a new day and the dread of what it would bring. The morning of the hearing dawned, clear and crisp. I dressed carefully in a navy suit I'd worn to James's funeral, somber but dignified. Eleanor helped me style my hair and insisted I wear my good pearl earrings. Appearances matter in court, she said, adjusting my collar. You need to look exactly like what you are, a competent, well-put-together woman who doesn't need anyone's guardianship. Sandra had arranged for her assistant to drive us to the courthouse, concerned that the stress might affect my ability to drive safely. As we pulled into the parking lot, I saw Michael and Rebecca already waiting by the entrance. Rebecca in a conservative gray dress, Michael looking uncomfortable in a suit and tie. Next to them stood an older man with a briefcase whom I assumed was their attorney. My heart ached at the sight of my son, now positioned as my adversary in a court of law. Remember, Sandra said quietly as we approached the entrance, let me do the talking. Answer questions directly and calmly. Don't let them provoke an emotional response. That's exactly what they want. Inside the courtroom, we took our places at opposite tables. Michael caught my eye briefly, then looked away, his face unreadable. Rebecca whispered continuously to their attorney, occasionally gesturing in my direction. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, entered and called the hearing to order. Rebecca and Michael's attorney spoke first, outlining their concerns about my declining cognitive state and increasingly paranoid behavior. He presented affidavits from Dr. Harris, the doctor who had seen me once for 10 minutes, and the nurse evaluator who had inspected my home without permission. They had even obtained a statement from a bank teller who noted that I seemed confused when making a withdrawal, though the teller hadn't mentioned that Rebecca had been hovering at my elbow, rushing me through the transaction. As their case unfolded, I maintained a calm demeanor, though inside I was seething at the distortions and outright lies being presented as fact. When it was Sandra's turn, she methodically dismantled their narrative. She presented Dr. Patel's comprehensive evaluation, conducted just days earlier, showing no cognitive impairment. She submitted the letters from my book club members, my volunteer coordinator at the library, and my bridge partners, all testifying to my mental acuity and active social life. Most damaging to their case, she produced the video footage of Rebecca and the nurse evaluator entering my home without permission, and bank records showing the unauthorized withdrawals from my account. Your Honor, Sandra concluded, what we have here is not a concerned son worried about his mother's declining health, but a systematic attempt to control Mrs. Wilson's assets through false claims of incompetence. This is, unfortunately, a textbook case of attempted elder abuse. I watched Michael's face as Sandra spoke, saw the moment when doubt crept into his expression. When he glanced at his wife with new uncertainty, the judge asked if there were any other witnesses. Sandra nodded. Yes, Your Honor. We call Eleanor Hartman, Rebecca Wilson's mother. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Rebecca's head snapped up in alarm as Eleanor made her way to the witness stand. After being sworn in, Eleanor testified about Rebecca's previous actions with her husband Vernon, the rushed guardianship, the rapid sale of their family home, the isolation in a facility despite his protests. Vernon died believing his own daughter thought he was incompetent and incapable, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. I've lived the past 5 years managing on an allowance from my own money, in an apartment I didn't choose, because I didn't fight hard enough when Rebecca did this to us. I won't stand by silently while she does the same thing to Margaret. Rebecca's attorney objected repeatedly, claiming Eleanor's testimony was irrelevant and prejudicial, but the judge allowed it to continue. By the time Eleanor stepped down, Rebecca's confident facade had crumbled, replaced by barely contained fury. The final witness was Michael himself. Under questioning from the judge, he appeared increasingly uncomfortable, especially when asked direct questions about who had initiated the guardianship petition and why they hadn't explored less restrictive options first. I thought this was what Mom needed," he stammered, avoiding my gaze. Beck said the doctors were concerned about her living alone. The judge fixed him with a penetrating look. "Mr. Wilson, did you personally review the medical evaluations before filing this petition?" Michael shifted in his seat. "Not in detail. Beck handled most of that part." The judge nodded, making a note. "And the alleged financial concerns, did you personally observe any mismanagement of funds by your mother?" Michael hesitated, then admitted, "No, Your Honor. Rebecca mentioned some concerns about unusual withdrawals, but I never saw any specific evidence." With each answer, he seemed to shrink further into himself, the realization of what he had participated in becoming increasingly clear on his face. After a brief recess, the judge returned with her decision. "I am dismissing the petition for guardianship," she announced firmly. "Not only do I find insufficient evidence of Mrs. Wilson's alleged incapacity, but I am deeply troubled by the manner in which this petition was pursued." She looked directly at Rebecca. "Mrs. Wilson the younger, the court takes a very dim view of attempts to manipulate the guardianship system for financial gain. The evidence presented today suggests a pattern of behavior that, in my view, warrants further investigation." She turned to me with a softer expression. "Mrs. Wilson the elder, I apologize that you have been subjected to this process. Based on what I've seen today, you are clearly capable of managing your own affairs." Relief flooded through me so intensely that I gripped the table to steady myself. Eleanor squeezed my hand under the table, and Sandra allowed herself a small, professional smile. Across the room, Rebecca was whispering furiously to her attorney while Michael sat in stunned silence. The judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am issuing a temporary protective order prohibiting Michael and Rebecca Wilson from entering Mrs. Wilson's home without her express invitation, attempting to access her financial accounts, or contacting medical providers regarding her care. This order will remain in effect for 90 days, during which time Mrs. Wilson may petition for a permanent order if necessary." She fixed Rebecca with a stern gaze. "I am also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential elder abuse charges, particularly regarding the unauthorized bank withdrawals and the apparently forged medical facility documents." As we stood to leave, Michael finally met my eyes across the courtroom. The shame and confusion I saw there broke my heart all over again. He started to approach me, but Rebecca grabbed his arm, her knuckles white, and pulled him toward the exit. The last thing I heard as they left was Rebecca's hiss, "This isn't over." Outside the courthouse, standing in the bright sunshine that seemed at odds with the emotional storm we'd just weathered, I thanked Sandra for her brilliant representation. "You were prepared for everything they threw at us," I marveled. She smiled, closing her briefcase. "The law is clear in these cases, Margaret. They never had a valid case, just a scheme they nearly got away with." As Sandra left for another appointment, Eleanor and I stood quietly for a moment, processing the victory. "What will you do now?" I asked her. "Rebecca will never forgive you for testifying." Eleanor's smile held a new strength I hadn't seen before. "I've lived the past 5 years afraid of losing access to my grandchildren if I crossed Rebecca, but living in fear isn't really living at all. Whatever happens next, I've done the right thing." Finally, she squeezed my hand. "Besides, I've been looking at apartments near your neighborhood. I think it's time I reclaimed some independence of my own." We were about to leave when I spotted Michael hurrying across the parking lot alone. "Mom," he called, slightly out of breath. "Can I talk to you, please?" Eleanor excused herself tactfully, saying she'd wait in the car. Michael and I sat on a bench outside the courthouse, an uncomfortable silence stretching between us. "I didn't know," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "about the bank withdrawals, the forged documents. I swear, I didn't know. I studied my son's face, searching for the boy I'd raised. But you knew about the guardianship petition. Michael, you knew you were trying to take away my home, my independence. He flinched at the truth of it. Beck said it was for your safety, that you were declining and wouldn't admit it. She had reports, assessments. He trailed off, the flimsiness of his justification hanging in the air between us. When did you stop trusting me to tell you the truth about my own life? I asked quietly. He had no answer. Rebecca's mother testified that this happened before, I continued. With Rebecca's father. Did you know about that? Michael shook his head, looking genuinely shocked. Beck told me her father had severe Parkinson's, that he needed round-the-clock care her mother couldn't provide. She said it was a difficult but necessary decision they made as a family. He looked up, his expression haunted. Was that a lie too? I didn't need to answer. He could see the truth in my face. The judge mentioned potential criminal charges, he said after a moment. Mom, I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought I was helping you. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be all right, as I had when he was small and came to me with skinned knees and broken toys, but some breaks can't be easily mended. What happens next is up to you, Michael, I said, standing to leave. I won't press charges against my own son if you had no knowledge of the financial theft. But I can't have Rebecca in my life anymore, and you need to decide what that means for our relationship. As I walked away, Michael called after me. Mom, I'm so sorry. Please, I turned back one last time. I know you are, Michael, but sorry doesn't undo the fact that you were willing to put me away, that you believed your wife over your mother without ever asking me directly if I needed help. I kept my voice gentle but firm. Take some time to think about what kind of man you want to be. My door will be open when you're ready to really talk about what happened and where we go from here. As I joined Eleanor in the car, I caught a glimpse of Michael in the rearview mirror, still sitting on the bench, head in his hands, for the first time since this ordeal began. I allowed myself to cry not just for what I'd almost lost, but for what my son had willingly thrown away. Trust that would take years to rebuild, if it ever could be. In the weeks that followed the hearing, my life settled into a new normal. Sandra helped me file for a permanent protective order against Rebecca, which was granted after she made several attempts to contact my friends and neighbors with stories about my deteriorating condition. Eleanor found an apartment just 3 blocks from my house and began the process of reclaiming her financial independence with the help of a lawyer specializing in financial elder abuse. We had lunch together twice a week, our unlikely friendship one of the few positive outcomes of the entire ordeal. Michael moved out of his home with Rebecca temporarily, staying with a friend while he, as he put it in a careful email, figured things out. He returned the money that had been taken from my accounts, though he claimed he'd had no knowledge of the withdrawals and had been shocked to find the cash hidden in Rebecca's desk drawer. The district attorney ultimately decided to pursue charges against Rebecca for financial elder abuse and fraud, based on the forged facility documents and bank withdrawals. When I expressed hesitation about putting my daughter-in-law on trial, Sandra gently reminded me, this isn't just about you, Margaret. If she's done this twice, to Eleanor's husband and to you, she do it again to someone else if there are no consequences. I agreed to cooperate with the prosecution. Though the thought of testifying in criminal court filled me with dread, Eleanor showed more resolve, telling me over coffee, I owe it to Vernon to see this through. He didn't live to see justice, but I can make sure his story is heard. Her determination strengthened my own, and together we prepared for the difficult months ahead. About 6 weeks after the guardianship hearing, Michael asked if he could come over to talk. I agreed, though I asked Martha to be at her window, watching for my signal if I needed help. Old habits of caution die hard. Michael arrived looking thinner than I remembered, with new lines around his eyes. He brought a bouquet of daisies, my favorite, though I couldn't remember the last time he'd remembered that detail. We sat in the living room, the space between us filled with unspoken words. I've filed for divorce, he said finally. I found out Rebecca had been planning to sell this house for months. She already had a realtor lined up, waiting for the guardianship to be approved. He looked around the room, at the walls that held our family history. She knew what this place meant to you, to us. I don't understand how she could. He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. I let the revelation settle between us. What made you finally believe it? I asked. After the hearing, I mean. Michael pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to me. It was a printout of an email from Rebecca to a realtor, dated 3 months earlier. Once guardianship is established, early June latest, we'll move quickly with the sale. Property should list at minimum $475,000 in current market. Occupant will be relocated by end of June, so we can stage and list by July 1st. The cold calculation of it, occupant instead of my husband's mother, stole my breath. Michael watched me read it, his expression grim. I found dozens of emails like that. She'd been planning this for almost a year, Mom. While she was smiling at you over Sunday dinners, she was already spending the money from your house. I refolded the email, hands trembling slightly. And the facility, Sunny Pines. Michael's jaw tightened. The cheapest option that Medicare would partially cover. Nothing like the luxury senior living she described to me. We talked for hours that afternoon, painful truths emerging with each passing minute. Michael admitted he'd ignored warning signs, choosing to believe Rebecca's version of events rather than having difficult conversations with me directly. She always had an explanation that made sense, he said. When I found your spare keys in her purse, she said you'd given them to her for emergencies. When appointments got changed, she said you'd forgotten making the changes. Every time I had doubts, she made me feel like I was being disloyal by questioning her. I listened, understanding how manipulation works, how it isolates and confuses. The thing I can't forgive myself for, he continued, voice breaking, is that I never once just asked you. I never said, Mom, are you having trouble remembering things? Or, would you like some help managing your appointments? I let her speak for you, and for me, and I just went along. He looked up at me, eyes pleading for something I wasn't sure I could give yet. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to try to make this right, somehow. I reached across the space between us and took his hand, my son's hand, still recognizable despite the man he'd become. It will take time, Michael. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. He nodded, accepting this hard truth. But we'll start here, I continued. With honesty, with difficult conversations, with showing up even when it's uncomfortable. I squeezed his hand. You're still my son. That hasn't changed, even if everything else has. As Michael was leaving, he paused at the door. Do you think you could come to dinner at my new place sometime? Nothing fancy, just, I'd like to cook for you for a change. I smiled, feeling a small crack in the wall between us. I'd like that, I said. But maybe we start with coffee next week. He nodded, understanding that rebuilding would happen in small steps, not grand gestures. As I watched him drive away, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not just grief for what we'd lost, but hope for what we might still create from the pieces. 2 months after the hearing, Rebecca pleaded guilty to reduced charges of attempted fraud and financial exploitation in exchange for restitution and probation. She avoided jail time but received a 5-year probation sentence that included financial monitoring and a prohibition from serving as anyone's guardian or power of attorney. Michael's divorce was finalized with surprising speed, their short marriage and prenuptial agreement simplifying the process. Eleanor moved into her new apartment and filed her own case against Rebecca for financial recovery related to Vernon's estate, a process that would take years but had already given her renewed purpose. As for me, I made changes to I updated my will, creating a living trust with clear provisions about my care and my assets. I installed better security on my home and continued my weekly check-ins with Dr. Patel, who documented my continued cognitive health at each visit, building a record no one could dispute. Most importantly, I started sharing my with friends, then with a senior advocacy group where I began volunteering. I learned that what happened to me happens to thousands of elderly Americans every year. Family members exploiting guardianship laws for financial gain, using stereotypes about aging to dismiss genuine concerns, isolating seniors from their support networks. The red flags are consistent, I told a group of seniors at a community workshop. Sudden changes to appointments or medications, important papers disappearing, new doctors you've never met before, restricted access to friends or other family members. These aren't just annoyances, they're warning signs. After each session, People would approach me privately to share their own experiences or concerns, and I would connect them with resources, lawyers like Sandra, doctors like Dr. Patel, support groups where they could find allies like Eleanor. Each person I helped felt like reclaiming a piece of what Rebecca had tried to take from me: my agency, my voice, my right to determine my own future. Today marks 1 year since that terrible morning when I found my bag packed by the door. 1 year since I called Eleanor in desperation as Rebecca prepared to ship me away to Sunny Pines. 1 year of rebuilding my relationship with Michael, my sense of security, my trust in my own judgment. Eleanor is coming over for dinner to mark the occasion, and Michael will join us for dessert, a small step toward the new normal we're creating together. This morning, I sat in my garden, the one James planted and I've maintained all these years, and felt the sun on my face. At 67, I'm not naive enough to think nothing will ever go wrong again. Someday I may indeed need help, may need to leave this house for somewhere more manageable. But when that day comes, it will be my decision, made with clear information and genuine options, not through manipulation and lies. If you're listening to my story right now, I want you to ask yourself, do you know an older person in your life who seems increasingly isolated or confused about their own affairs? Are there sudden changes in their living situation or financial management that don't quite make sense? Take a moment and really think about it, because elder abuse thrives in silence and isolation. It feeds on our reluctance to ask uncomfortable questions or challenge family members who claim to be helping. If my story sounds familiar, if you recognize these patterns in your own life or someone you love, don't wait until there's a suitcase by the door. Reach out now. Ask the direct questions. Trust your instincts. And if you are that older person, know this: your age does not diminish your right to autonomy, to dignity, to control over your own life. Save this story as a reminder that you are not alone, and you are worth fighting for. My name is Margaret Wilson. I'm speaking to you from my own living room, in the house where I've lived for 45 years, and where I intend to stay as long as I possibly can. If you found value in my story, please consider leaving a comment below, sharing one thing you'll do differently after hearing it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories like mine. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message today, send it to them directly. Because sometimes, the most important call you'll ever make is the one like I made to Eleanor, a call for help that can change everything. Thank you for listening.